All right, I'm going to get started. Today is Wednesday the 27th. I'm going to lecture on Chapter 3 for the first hour, as it says up there, and the second hour is lab. Now, with some people, as soon as they hear lab, out of my chair, I'm going to get the hell out of here. I understand that. I do. All right? But that said, this is the time that you have to go through the labs that are in the chapters and try the stuff, especially if you feel that you're deficient in any area for any reason. But I'm not going to sit there and tie you down and make you do them. And some people, will tell me, oh, I'm going to do them at home, which may or may not be true. I don't know. You know what? I don't want to go home with you and find out, to be honest with you. All right? But you will have time to work on it. Then the same kind of thing on Monday. The first hour, I'm going to go over Chapter 4, which is on CSS. And the second hour will be lab. Then Wednesday, a week from today, I think we can go through all this stuff in 1 hour because one of those chapters is only about 10 pages long. All right? And then the rest will be lab. So a week from today, you will be getting your first assignment. All right? I've already written it up, but I want to do it first before I hand it out to you and make sure that it seems like it's something you should be able to do. All right? Then I had an epiphany today, and unfortunately I did. That was the good news. The bad news was it was 10 minutes before class started. I thought, I know what I should do in the class today. I couldn't do it in 10 minutes. I tried, and all I did was muck stuff up. So what I was going to show you that I thought of 10 minutes before class, I'll show you that on Monday. But for right now, I'm going to start going through Chapter 3. All right? As you can see, and again, this is all stuff that you should have had in the 157 class. All right? Now, if you raise your hand and go, well, I had so-and-so and I didn't get that stuff, there's not much we can do about it. So ideally, this will be review. But what I'm going to do and try to get done by Monday is to do a very quick little one-page website on HTML5 and CSS. All right? And I'll give you all the code. You can have all that. And it'll show the stuff that's in this chapter, and it'll show the stuff that's in the next chapter. Because what better way to demo it than with a website? All right? So I grabbed an old website that I created, but when I started making changes to it, that's what I was doing in the last 10 minutes before class. That was a mistake. All right. So you should understand how to build a basic dynamic web page. You should understand where to add CSS and JavaScript in your web pages. We talked a little bit about that last time. You should know the difference between block and inline elements. You should understand how to add an image to a web page, how to create a simple form on a web page, how to add links either to other websites or to specific spots within a web page. You should understand how to build tables. The one thing you may not have spent a lot of time going through last semester was this one. You probably didn't do a lot of work with graphics. When you work with graphics, there's actually two different ways that you can do this. You can use the HTML5 canvas element, or you can use scalar vector graphics. The graphics are much more professional looking, and they discuss both of them in here. All right? And then finally, bless you, if you didn't know it, one of the reasons that HTML5 actually was created, and I may have said this in the last class, I don't remember, but whether I did or not, one of the reasons they came back and did HTML5 is the fact that there is not universal agreement between how to do audio and video among different browser manufacturers. All right? And so the idea was you were going to have an audio tag and a video tag, and they would be used by all browsers. That's the good news. The bad news is the browser manufacturers still can't agree on what formats to use. Some of them want to use formats for audio and video of stuff that's open source and it's free and it's much easier to use. And some other people or other browser manufacturers don't want that. That's why, again, you use a lot of those vendor prefixes that we talked a little bit about last time. So, as they mentioned, throughout the rest of this book, that's what this book is about. It's the combination of HTML, CSS, jQuery, and JavaScript. All right? And again, what I've decided, we'll see how it goes time-wise. If we have time, fine. Then we will go over the stuff that's in the last 10 chapters of the book, chapters 20 through 29, which are on AngularJS. But let's say we don't have time, all right? Well, since I'm using this book both for this class and for a second-year class, in the second year, we are going through 20 through 29. And if we don't have time to go through them in here, I'm going to grab those lectures and I'm going to put them in both places. So you'll have them available to you. All right? Hopefully that made some sense at least. All right. So as it says here, this lesson is designed to accomplish two tasks. The first is to familiarize you or refamiliarize you with important basics of HTML. And the second is to start getting you into the idea that as far as what you have to do for having the dynamicity in here. All right? All right. So the first thing they talk about in here is they talk about, right here, they talk about different doc types you can use. I didn't think, they listed all of them in here, so I went back and created my own. And that's here. All right? This is the one that we're using in here. It's an HTML5 document type. All right? It's been very much fixed, cleaned up, etc. It's pretty small. It doesn't matter whether you say doc type in uppercase, lowercase, or mixed case. But that says HTML5. That's what that's showing. You might still see something like this out there. This was actually, should be on one line, but I put it on two lines just so it would all fit on the screen. All right? And right there it says strict. Again, you may or may not know this. I have no idea. I know that Jim Schmidt, I know at least he was a fan of W3 schools because he would always tell me about W3 schools. But one of the nice things that they do have out there is a list of all the tags. You'll notice when you look at these tags that some of them have the 5 by them, which is the HTML5 logo. That means they're ones that are supported with the doc type of HTML, but would have limited to no support in the other doc types. You'll also notice if you look in here that some of the stuff as you go through here is red. When it's red, what it means is that stuff has been deprecated. When something is deprecated in here, it means it's been marked for extinction. All right? But no one ever knows if it'll ever go away because there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of sites that have some of this stuff. So what they're saying is if you're doing new development today, you shouldn't use the center tag. You should use CSS. But a lot of people still use the old stuff. They have it out there. And the reason I'm telling you that is if you see this strict, what strict means is literally you can't use any of those deprecated elements. All right? It will not your document will not validate when you run it through the validator. All right? If you've got it in there stuck in there as strict. Okay? All right, but that was too tough for some people. So they came up and they said, well, what about transitional? That means we're transitioning over from the old to the new. Well, what that means is when you take a look in here, everything that's in red that says not supported, you can use, except there's a few things that are in here someplace there that talk about frames. You can't use that frame stuff. But you can use everything else, whether it's red or not red. Well, that still wasn't enough for some people. So they came out and said, well, then we're going to have this, which is equal to transitional, but it also allows you to use the frame stuff. So in other words, that you can use anything, all right, whether it's deprecated or not, all right? All right. And again, maybe I'm wrong, but I've got to take for granted, it says here, an element is composed of 3 main components. All right, the tag, the content, and the attribute. All right, and here's a good example right here. All right, and you look at that, well, what's the tag? It's a P tag, right? So it's a paragraph. What's the attribute? It's a line. All right, what's the value of the attribute? It's center. So you should be able to look at that and figure out how to do all that stuff. You know, I'm taking for granted, regardless of what you thought, regardless of what you learned or didn't learn in the 157 class, you at least learned something. If nothing else, you learned something on your own doing the work. All right? All right, so then they start to talk about the different components on a web page. All right, and the first thing they mention is title, and you should know this. The title goes in the head section. Everything that's in the head section does not appear on the web page itself. All right. So the title, for example, that's what comes in right here. Okay, so that's what shows up in your bar up here. It's also when you bookmark, that's what it typically is, the title of it when you bookmark it. All right. So they've got some examples in here. They're kind of stupid examples to be honest with you, but you can look through them if you want to. Then they talk about meta tags. All right. And again, this is something that again is up in the head section. Almost every meta tag you put in is not actually necessary. You're putting them in to help with search engine optimization, and so that you're basically your page, your site comes up in the best and fastest way possible. All right. This one, for example, says that the character set you're using is the Unicode character set. All right. Again, hopefully you've heard about stuff like this. This is nice because you used to have to type in all this stuff. And you don't anymore. They've shortened a lot of stuff up. The keywords. Again, if you have not heard this, the idea with the keywords is let's assume that I'm going to open up Jeff's Sporting Goods store. All right? And I'm going to do that, and I create myself a website. Okay? Then up in the head section, underneath that, I put meta, and I put name equal keywords, and I put content equal, and I put a whole bunch of stuff in there. Baseballs, basketballs, hockey pucks, etc. The idea of putting stuff in there in those keywords is after I get done with my site and I submit it to Google and other search engines, what happens is those search engines spider my site. So they go through the entire site. One of the first things they look at is they say, okay, what keywords do you have? And they've got some kind of a program that goes through the site and says, are you actually using those keywords? All right, and if that doesn't make any sense to you, this should. All right, if you remember, now what is it, 14 and a half years ago, whatever it is, 9/11. It was amazing the number of sites after 9/11 that put 9/11 in their site. And I'm even talking about things like sporting goods stores, which had nothing to do with it. So what happens is, and what Google ends up doing is it spiders through and it looks at, if it's got some kind of a formula that it uses that they won't tell anybody. But if you've got too many words that you put in your keywords that are not actually in your site, you get a lower ranking. So they're trying to do that for search engine optimization, but they want to make sure that any keywords that you put in are actually in the site itself. Maybe that was a long explanation, but hopefully it makes some sense. All right. When you put CSS on a web page, there's 3 ways that you can do it. You can put it in an external file, a .css file, which is what you're going to do. All right. You can put it in on a web page at the top in the head section, like they show it here. Or you can put it on an individual element. All right. And the cascading idea is the more local you put it, overrides all the other stuff. So if I use a span tag inside of a paragraph, and that same paragraph has got something in here, and that same paragraph has got something in an external CSS file, the local one, the span tag, will override the other stuff. And most people are used to, wait a minute, it seems like the most major one would be the .css. Shouldn't that be, if that's the most major one, shouldn't that override the other ones? And if it did, the other ones, a lot of times you'd never see the stuff that's put in there. So the cascading basically goes almost in the opposite direction of what people would think it would go in. All right? And I'm taking for granted that you can look at something like this and understand what that means. You know enough CSS, however you learned it, that when you look at that, you see, oh yeah, so what we're doing there is we're saying all H1 tags will have a background color of black and a font color of white. All right? In other words, they'll be reverse text. It'll look like that. What I like about the book is the author shows you how you can do that here with straight CSS, and then he shows you how to do the same thing here. And you can, and if you look at that, you say, well, that's JavaScript. It is, but just if you've never seen it before, this is JavaScript making calls out to jQuery. That's what a lot of jQuery looks like. So the stuff that you're going to learn, that's the stuff. All right? There's more to it than that, but just so you can start seeing it. So they show you how to do the same thing. In one case, it said CSS reverse text color. and the other one it says JavaScript reverse text color. But they're both doing the same type of thing. You should know by now that when you put script tags in, when you put JavaScript into a program, you need script tags. There's all sorts of disagreement among people who work in the field as far as should you have your script tags in the head section or should you put your script tags on the bottom, right before your ending body tag. Those people who think that you should put it on the very bottom by the body tag, all right, the reason that they say that is now you're sure everything that was in the head, whatever it is, and all the body content has been loaded because you put it at the bottom. And other people say, no, it really doesn't matter. All right, depending on how you write your jQuery, it typically does not matter. The only thing is, since in here I'm using jQuery, right there, I must put my reference to jQuery above that. All right, and typically, if I have some kind of a spreadsheet that's going to be using some kind of a CSS file that's going to be using jQuery, I have my CSS stuff before that too. All right, you're going to see all this stuff as we go on. But the idea, and again, hopefully you can look at this and it makes sense to you. This says as soon as the body's been loaded, call reverse text. In other words, that's going to find any H1 tag that you have in here, and there's only one, but it's going to find it, and it's going to use jQuery to do the same thing that we did earlier with straight CSS. What confuses people a lot of times when they start looking at jQuery is they say, this is just CSS. It's kind of programmatic CSS, for lack of better words. All right? But if you understand CSS selectors, all right, using dot for class and pound sign for ID, etc., and that kind of stuff, you're on your way to learning jQuery already. All right, the no script tags, occasionally people turn JavaScript off. On any modern machine, JavaScript is always on and it's always enabled. But some people, either because they heard from somebody that JavaScript is evil or whatever, seriously, that they just turn it off. They think, no, I don't want that on my machine. So in other words, if JavaScript is turned off on the machine and this comes up, instead of running the script, if you put a no script tag in there, that H3 tag will come up instead. All right. The link is almost exclusively used to put in your CSS. Again, I'm taking for granted that you all understand what all that stuff in there means. All right. You can use link for other things. Have you ever looked up on here, and you can see it right here. This is, I'm doing some work with Blackboard. You see the BB right there? You know what that's called? This? It's a favicon. You ever heard that? Some call it fav icon, but whatever. All right. You can also use the link tag to put in favicons. All right. Oops. I'm not supposed to show you that yet. So, all right. Again, using important body element attributes. Kind of an important page right here. Again, I am supposing that everybody who's in this room understands the difference between an ID and a class. How many IDs can you have on a page? Each one has to be unique, right? Each ID on a page must be unique. You can use the same class on a page an infinite number of times, basically. Right. Then they show block versus inline elements. And again, I don't know, but I'm hoping you understand the difference between, here's a couple examples of block elements. A div tag and a p tag. What does that mean? It means there's a blank line before it and a blank line after it. It's in a block. All right. What's an inline element? It means there's no line before it or after it. So things like a strong tag, all right, bold, emphasis tag, italicized tag, etc. Those are all inline tags. You can force things to be displayed in either a block or an inline format. Okay? Most of the time when you go out to a site and you see it where they've got the menu and it's all up along the top, they did that as an unordered list. And an unordered list, by default, is going to show, it's going to basically display in block style. All right? But they set the display to inline, so it'll all display on the same line. You can also do none. And again, there's misnomers that people have about this. It says will not render to the screen even though it's parsed and exists in the DOM. So in other words, for lack of better words, it's invisible on screen, but it's still taking up area, for lack of better words. It's still there. All right? I was always taught, a lot of my training in this stuff is self-taught, but I was always taught in programming languages and other things that if you have the ability to make things appear and disappear, don't use it. All right. There's a difference between using jQuery and have something fade in or fade out where they can see it and have it gradually go away. But it's easy to freak people out when something is not on the page and boom, they turn around, now something's there. All right. Especially older people. Kids, that doesn't seem to bother them at all. All right. All right. BR tags and HR tags. What's a BR tag? Line break. What's an HR tag? It's right here. It's that one. Whoops. It's the black thing that's right there. Okay? All right. What's the difference? I said before there's three basic ways that you can put in CSS. You can have it externally, .css, internally, all right, with a style tag, and inline. And with inline, you do it with span tags. This is always discouraged. All right? And I've used this example before, so maybe you've even heard me say it if you had me for another class. But an example of this where people I've seen use this is if somebody is writing a site, and in that site, they're basically telling like a children's nursery rhyme, where they say once upon a time, and they want that O to be really big. All right? And so they just want a letter of a sentence of a paragraph on a page. They might use a span tag to do that. All right? Again, that is discouraged, but people do it anyway. All right. Kind of the opposite of a span is a div. And again, where a span is an inline, a div is a block level element. All right? And it's funny how things work because for years, everything was done with divs. All right? And then HTML5 came and they've replaced a lot of the work with divs with a lot of their own tags. All right? But I will tell you that the code that I look at, the stuff I see online, it's not so much that divs are making a comeback, but I don't think they ever really went away. A lot of people end up using divs like crazy when they're programming with jQuery because it allows you to grab a bunch of stuff and put it together. Whatever you want. All right, so again, I would strongly suggest that you look at the exercises that are in here. All right, they're trying to build something like this, especially if your idea or what your understanding of this stuff isn't that good. All right, and go into the CSS that's here. You've got all this code. Play with it. All right, people say I don't understand the difference between margin and padding. All right, then grab this, okay, and change it from 3 pixels to 30 pixels. Then change it from margin to padding, or padding to margin. You'll start to see what the differences are. They always give you the code in here, so you've always got everything. All right. This adding link elements, it's what I mentioned before. So I have to take for granted that you all know how to read that line. You all realize that it's going to say daily creations, but it'll have by default the blue color with the underscore, and when you click it, that's where it's going to go. All right. But it is also possible for you to do something like this, and you've all seen this where you've got a web page that's really long, and on a web page that's really long, you've got a go to top type of thing that's all over the place, the hyperlink. That's how you do it. Near the top, you will call something, and I don't know if this was mentioned the other day or somebody in class yesterday mentioned it, but I would never name anything like that with a blank space in it. I just think that's a poor programming practice anyway. All right. Same thing when you're going through this stuff, okay? Right here. Different ways that you can put images in. When you have an image, what's the only required tag for an image? What is it? Source. That's it. Most people tend to put in height and they tend to put in width so that the browser can start ghosting in basically the size so it can start loading it, especially if it's a more complex type of image. You probably have done this purposely or not purposely. You can also distort images. You know, if I've got a 1000 by 1000 image and I tell it to put it in and I tell its height to be 200 and its width to be 200, sometimes it may not look exactly the way I want it to look. All right. And I should mention this. I don't know if you'll ever have reason to use it or not. But if you've never seen this site, because it's free, makeathumbnail.com, which will take any image that you have, and the unfortunate thing is it only gives you 4 or 5 sizes, but it's nice, and I use it all the time. You know, if I want to create a page and put a bunch of thumbnails on it, all right, maybe put a bunch of 100 by 100 thumbnails on it, all right.
Hey Jeff, there's a site called placehold.it.
Okay.
You can link in the source and it'll load on your page without you ever having to create an image, whatever size you put after the URL.
Okay, and that was what? Placehold.it?
Yeah.
Okay. That's nice. It's good to know. All right. All right. Again, I take for granted that you understand the difference between an unordered list and an ordered list. All right. And that you know that when you're working with either one, you know, by default, this is what you get, but you don't have to have that with an unordered list rather. You can either put a square there instead of a circle, or a circle that's not colored in, or you can actually put your own icon there if you want. All right. And with ordered lists, by default, they're numbered, but you can have alphabetic letters, A to Z, in either upper or lowercase, Roman numerals in upper or lowercase. And that's where, I know when you'd ask that about W3 schools, that's where W3 schools shines. I mean, if I forget how to do something, that's usually where I go. All right, or if I go out and Google it, it's one of the first sites that I find. All right, and I was talking to a couple people this morning, but the class had ended, and I don't know for sure whether or not you know this site. Does everybody know what Stack Overflow is? Because if you've never used it, it's a great site. I mean, if you're doing your C# or you're doing your Java or whatever, and you get some kind of a weird error, typically you can just type the whole error into here. And a lot of times if you type that into Google, this is one of the first things that'll come up. I will tell you, this is a site for developers, so don't ask dumb questions or people will call you an a-hole. All right? They will do it. And worse. But the other thing too is, if you ask a question, even if it's a good question that's been asked a bunch of times, you'll be called an a-hole. And if you're lucky, somebody will give you a hyperlink and say, this question has been answered so many times, click here, type of an idea. But this is a site, you know, and you can actually sign up if you want, you know, and but it's open source in that, you know, people helping people type of an idea.
I'll be honest, you'll still get called an a-hole even if the question's never been asked. There will be that one.
It just depends. But I know people, you know, that's the other thing. I've seen people post this out there. I've got an assignment due tomorrow, and I'm having trouble with it. Somebody will write back, wow, it'd be nice to put some code out there so we could see if you've done anything. You know, because there used to be a lot of sites out there where you could put that out and you'd have people do your work for you. All right, which works fine until you actually get a job. All right? All right. When you work with tables, you may have, again, I don't know how much you got into tables. It's possible that you created a table with just a table tag and maybe one or more header tags and maybe one or more data tags. I don't know. But it's also possible that you can take your area and break it up and have a T-head area and a T-body area and a T-foot area. All right? The only thing about that that's worth knowing about is that if you're going to use all three of these, a T-head, a T-body, and a T-foot, you must literally, when you're placing them, you must put the T-foot before you put the T-head. You must put the T-foot before the T-body. You understand what I'm saying? As far as the way you actually put them in code. I'm not saying that's where they're going to come out, but that's what the system expects. I don't know why. It's some weird, goofy thing that somebody decided a long time ago. All right, when you're working with tables, you can put borders on them. You can have different things span multiple columns, span multiple rows. Again, if you want more, okay. If you're not aware of this, I'm just giving you a little history here, whether you want it or not. But in the olden days, like in the 90s, all right, what most developers did was they would create a template for any website they created. And that template would be a humongous table. And inside of that humongous table would be a series of other tables. Almost everything that was done in tables. All right, and you'll still see sites, if you look out there, there are a lot of sites that have been around for years that people just aren't going to change them. All right. Today, you're only supposed to use tables for literally for tabular data. So really, the authors, this isn't tabular data here, sorry. But I think he's trying to show you that you can put anything in there, even images. All right. Working with forms, again, I'm going to take for granted that you've at least done a form. And you better have, because you're going to do 2 of them, all right, for your assignment. Okay? And as far as the stuff that's in there, I won't even go over this. Let's just take a look at the form. All right? Stuff that you should know about. The square that's right there. That's our field set, right? Contact info. That's the legend. Name, destination, origin, and flight date labels. Frodo, the Shire, Mount Doom, and 111, text boxes. All right. Eagles, drop-down list. One-way and round trip, radio buttons. This area in here, text area. Over here, checkbox. And there's our default buttons of submit and reset. All right. And the idea with the submit and the reset, people say, oh yeah, you can click reset and everything goes blank. That's not true. When you click reset, it resets the form to all of its default values. There's a big difference between those. And submit, all right, you may or may not have used that before, but typically submit, when you have a form tag, that form tag is going to have an action in it that's going to send your form, your .html file, out to some server-side program, PHP or JSP or ASP or whatever, all right? And that's what should happen ideally. But what you're going to do, and I'll give you this much of it right now, is you're going to build a mythical site. All right? It's going to have, to start with, 4 pages on it. 2 of the pages are going to literally look identical to one another. All right? They're going to look more or less like this, except yours can't be that ugly. All right? And when you do yours, you're going to have to validate every single thing in every field. And I'll tell you exactly what to validate, etc. And I even gave you some links, so if you don't really know how to do it, it'll give you some ideas. But with one of them, you will do all of the validation using just HTML5 and the stuff that's available in there. With the other one, you'll do the same validations, but you're not allowed to use HTML5. You'll do it solely with JavaScript. All right, and then after we get into talking about jQuery, you'll add a third one where where again it'll look the same, but you'll validate it using the jQuery plugin, the jQuery validation plugin. You can try it now if you want to, but we won't talk about it for a while yet. All right, so if you want to learn how to build that, there's all the code. And again, as I mentioned, you got both on the P drive and on Blackboard. All the code is out there. That's why, like I said, it's what? It's about almost 340, and we're pretty close to done, to be honest with you. So you're going to have plenty of time today to go in there and take a look at this stuff. All right? All right. So next, again, they talk about SVG, which I think is scalable vector graphics right there. Notice it's a series of lines, arcs, fills, etc. People don't like it because you end up writing a lot of code when you look at this. And some people look at that and go, that's not code, that's HTML. I'm sorry, it's code. All right? So you draw this to end up getting something that looks like this. And I mentioned the class yesterday. I don't know if I said it to you guys before. When I was a kid, that was that toy, the spirograph. Remember, my brother got one for Christmas one year. All right? And that's basically how you'd set it up. They go through it in quite a bit of depth and breadth of coverage right here. All right? And they talk about how you set up all your coordinates, etc. I wouldn't expect you to do something like this. If you want to, that's up to you. All right? The other way that you can do things is to use a canvas. All right? When you use a canvas, you literally are writing code because almost all the stuff you do to get the canvas to work is JavaScript. Typically, when you're doing more high-end graphics that you're creating yourself, you use SVG because it scales. That's what the S in there is for. It scales well on different types of devices, etc. All right. Whereas if you use the canvas, it might look good, but if you put it on a mobile device, it may end up looking, it might be quite a bit of degradation of quality. All right.
You said SVG?
Yes. And again, as I mentioned previously, one of the reasons that HTML5 even came into play was the fact that it now has video controls and it has audio controls. All right, and you'll see stuff like this, MP4 and OGG, etc. And again, it all has to do with the fact that different browser manufacturers want to have their stuff in different types of formats. All right. Now, the only other thing that I mentioned here, and I didn't, and I wish I would have, but for example, for the Canvas, notice that they have a hyperlink here, and it sends you back to W3 Schools. Most everything that they talk about in here, they give you an example of, and then they link it back to someplace. Now, again, a lot of them are very basic. It's W3 Schools. But you should be able to take a look at it, all right, and if you have questions, hopefully be able to work with it, all right? So as it says, this is the basics of web development. I'm not going to go through any of this stuff, all right? But if we go back to here, I'm just about finished. In the next chapter is not long, all right? It's on CSS, all right? It's about the same length as this chapter was. But what I want to do for the next class is, like I said, and I'll work on it now even, I'll start on it now, is to fix that website. And I'll make it a little website. It'll probably be 2 or 3 pages. A page on HTML5, a page on JavaScript, and a page on CSS. All right, where I'll try to put some examples and some stuff in there. All right. Any questions on any of this? This should hopefully have all been reviewed. And sometimes you surprise yourself too. You're like, yeah, I don't think I learned anything. And then you start looking, yeah, I remember that. I remember that. So if you learned, however you learned it, you learned probably a lot more than you think you did. All right. And that's all I had for this period.